Hello, chefs. This is Chef's PSA Podcast. I'm your host, André Natera. On today's episode, we're going to get into the psychology of eating and how chefs can influence the dining experience. Stay tuned. Now, before we get into it, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you leave 5 stars. Nothing less than 5 stars. I appreciate it. Why? Well, it's a 5-star podcast, obviously. Big announcement. As of yesterday, Chef's PSA Podcast and Chef's PSA in general is now available on Substack. So if you're on Substack, go find me. You're going to be able to get all the podcasts that you currently listen to, plus some exclusive Substack-only podcasts for subscribers, Culinary Leadership Fundamentals video course, free audiobooks, free ebooks, and a special discount code for the merch exclusively for my Substack premium subscribers. It's a way that you could support the show. It goes a long way, and more to come. For the price of some late night after work snacks, you could get chef brains. Think about that. This education is priceless. What are you waiting for? Go to Substack. If not, you will still get the great Chef's PSA podcast weekly here on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, wherever you listen to the podcast. Also, check this out. Chef's PSA hoodie. New. Go get one. I was at a food festival the other day and everyone kept commenting how much they liked my hoodie. I was the most fashionable chef at the food festival wearing the hoodie. So go get 3 because it's white. And if it gets dirty, you have another go-to. That's what I did. But we digress. Let's get into it. I'm going to share a story with you. When I was at a restaurant, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, and I went to go eat, there was a golden tree in the center of the dining room. And as I walked by this golden tree, as I was on my way to sit down to eat, I noticed that there was little what looked to be like perfume samples clipped all over the tree. And I thought that was odd. I was wondering what was going on. Now, I did think that the restaurant smelled really good when I walked in there. And for those of you that don't know, I'm a little bit of a super smeller. I like smells. I think that's what's helped me become a successful chef is I really have a heightened sense of smell, strong olfactory senses. I like a lot of cologne. Sometimes some people say I wear too much. Anyway, what's the best cologne in case you're asking? Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille or Oud Mineral, which is actually really good, or Tobacco Oud. That's what I like. Oud Wood is another good one. Anyway, we digress. We could talk about cologne on a different podcast. As I'm walking by this golden tree, I thought it was pretty odd. I was like, why is there little perfume samples clipped to this tree? Anyway, the courses of food would come out, and every now and again, I noticed that I would smell this fragrance. After service, I spoke to the chef there, and I asked the question. I said, what's up with the fragrance on the tree? Mind you, I was sitting very close to the tree, and the chef told me that as courses come out, they spray the fragrance. And then after a while, they will just spray the fragrance in anticipation of the next course. So that way you anchor the delicious food with the smell. And I thought that was super interesting. So if you know the experiment of Pavlov's dog, it's a famous experiment in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. He would give the dog a treat and he would ring the bell. And then he would give the dog a treat and he would ring the bell. And then after a while, all he had to do was ring the bell and the dog would start salivating for the treat. And it's this conditioning experiment. And so this 3-Michelin-star restaurant was also doing the same conditioning experiment with the people that were eating in the dining room. Now, I thought that was super interesting. And the reason I bring that story up is because that's what today's podcast is all about, is how can you affect the experience that the diner has through their senses and through other means of simple adjustments that aren't necessarily just the food. So let's get into it. Now, let's assume that there's a baseline of delicious food that we're talking about. Your food is cooked well, you've thought it through, the menu's well written. One of the biggest effects that you could do is the presentation of the food. And the presentation of the food goes a long way. People will say food tastes better when it's beautifully presented. Now, I've done a podcast where I've explained that taste is superior to plating because plating wears off after a couple of minutes. But that's only if I had to choose which one would I rather have, taste or presentation. But let's assume taste is there, then presentation is a definite must. Food that is aesthetically pleasing and beautiful tastes different. It sets the stage. As a chef, when I would go out and eat and I see something that's beautiful, maybe in a presentation that I've never seen before, I want to take a photo of it. I want to deconstruct it in my mind. I'm stealing little nuance on how they did things. What is this herb? Where'd they pick that from? What is this bud? What is this flour that they're using? How did they make that sauce shine like that? What is this fluid gel on the plate, right? You start to dissect everything on the plate and you start to get impressed with it. Now that's from a chef's perspective. Think about it from a diner's perspective, a non-chef, a civilian. They're going in, they're looking at the beautiful food, and they're stunned. They're experiencing something what people might call visual food art for the first time. If the food is already delicious and it's visually beautiful and stunning, it completely transforms the experience for the guest. And you could do little touches, pouring the sauce tableside, finishing with some truffles, putting a spoonful of a finishing ingredient on top. Maybe it's cream, maybe it's caviar. If it's a dessert, maybe you're pouring the anglaise. Maybe you're putting the ice cream inside the souffle, or you're pouring anglaise inside a souffle. Maybe you're blow torching the creme brulee at the table. All these little things start to change the experience in the diner's mind. And using the example of the creme brulee, if you start burning sugar at the table, not only do they get the visual, but they also get the scent. They're starting to smell the sugar start to caramelize, and it starts to build the anticipation that it's going to be more delicious. In general, people will say the food tastes better if it's beautiful. You could present the same dish two different ways. One way, beautiful, the other way, sloppy. Have people taste it, and the one that is presented more beautifully, people will say tastes better than the other one. Exact same food. Then there's the auditory experience. Now, for those of you that know me, you know I like hip hop music. And I could say one of my biggest pet peeves in restaurants is they play bad music. And I've worked at places that play bad music. I'm not in control of the playlist. But there's nothing worse when the music doesn't match the ambiance. Music sets the stage. Sometimes you want it so people could enjoy it, and sometimes you want it in the background so people could enjoy the conversation and focus on the food. So depending on the type of restaurant that you have, it's going to make an impact. Think about it. When you walk in somewhere and they're playing your favorite song, you're going to like that restaurant a little bit more. However, if they're playing terrible music that just doesn't fit, it's going to slightly ruin the experience for you. Maybe not a lot, but just a slight notch down. Music can play a big impact. There's restaurants out there that will change the volume and the tone of the music as dinner progresses. So if you're in a tasting menu style restaurant, the music starts out really low and slow in the beginning, and towards the end, it builds up and it gets more energetic towards the end of the meal. All that has a factor in how you enjoy your dinner, as does the acoustics, right? Is there sound panels? Are there rugs on the floor? A lot of restaurants that want to be loud and buzzy want to have wooden floors because they want the sound to bounce. They want it to feel loud and vibrant when you're in there dining. Other places want it to be nice and quiet so you could hear a pin drop. And so more carpet affects that versus hardwood floors. Sound panels, art on the wall, rugs, ceilings, all of that plays a part in how the music or how the noise of the restaurant is. And you can also think about restaurants that have open kitchens. Are you the type of restaurant that the open kitchen is the show? Are the chefs back there playing music and being distracting to what's happening in the restaurant? Are they calling too loud? Are they too disruptive? I've been that chef where I was calling the pass a little too loud and I was disturbing the dining room, calling for my scallops. So you have to understand where you're at. Is the open kitchen adding or subtracting from the dining experience? You have to pay attention to that. Do you need to turn your music up a little bit? Do you need to turn it down a little bit? Do you need more energy in the dining room? If you're catering to a young crowd, you want to make sure that that music appeals to them. Same thing to an older crowd. Does the music appeal? Years ago, I went to this restaurant in Dallas. Shout out to Matt McAllister. He had opened up FT33. And so this was probably, I think, 2013. And I remember when I walked in, it was a little bit taboo at that time to play hip hop music in restaurants, at least good hip hop music. And I remember I walked in and he was banging Wu-Tang Clan Method Man. And I just remember saying, that's it, I'm in. And I wrote a review for him and I put that in the review. It was like, good music, playing Method Man as soon as you walk in. I'm already happy. And it built that environment. It was a cool restaurant and he had cool music going on. So if you're going for that cool vibe, call me up. I'll give you your hip hop playlist that you want in the restaurant. Anyway, we digress. There's also the tactile senses when you think about the way that the menu feels, the paper that it's on. Is it cheap, flimsy paper? Is it nice cardstock? Did you take a signet ring and stamp it with wax? Is the paper scented? I've seen restaurants that scent the paper a little bit. All of this is important. What's the weight of the cutlery? Is it fine china or is it heavy? You use a heavier china for a more casual restaurant. You use a finer china for a more fine dining restaurant. If you were to flip it, it would feel awkward in the setting. It will affect the experience. Not always, but in a lot of cases. What type of linen are you using? Are there things on the table that they could touch? Is there leather? Are there placemats? What are the placemats made of? The quality of the tactile senses is going to affect how you feel, and it needs to match the restaurant. Take wine glasses, for example. Are you using a nice crystal wine glass? Are you using a proper decanter? If you're going to sell expensive bottles of wine, a wine connoisseur wants to drink it out of a good glass. So that's something that you have to consider as well. While we're on the subject, a good bar program is always going to match the proper beverage to the proper glass. A lot of restaurants don't do that. But is it the right glass for the right beverage? The right glass for the right wine? Red wine, white wine glasses, but there's more than just white and red wine glasses, right? it affects it. It adds elements of luxury. It's attention to detail in the restaurant. There's the descriptive language on the menu. Is it too wordy? Is it not wordy enough? Depending on the type of restaurant you have, maybe you want more descriptive language. Maybe you want less descriptive language. How are the prices written on the menu? Are they ending in 99 or 98? Or are they ending in 00, or are they just round whole numbers, no decimals? Where's the placement of those numbers? What type of font are you using? Is it easy to read? A problem a lot of restaurants have is they have hard to read menus that are printed too small in dark environments, and it makes it difficult for the guest to read what's on it. Another thing that's difficult is when you go into a restaurant that is a busy, big place and they use a lot of words that you can't understand. Don't always think like a chef. Think like the diner. Think like the guest. Do they understand this language? Not everything has to be the exact technical term. Sometimes you got to dumb it down a little bit for the audience. You want it easy to understand, because if it's too difficult for them to pronounce the words, they may be reluctant to order it. There's this thing called the golden triangle, where people's eyes naturally navigate as they look at a menu. So do you place your items there? The items that you want them to order. There's something called the decoy effect, where you place a high-priced item next to a lower-priced item to make the lower-priced item that's also expensive look more attractive. All of this psychology affects how people order. When the server comes up to the table and says, "I recommend this," people are going to take advantage of that recommendation. It's important that you're training your servers to recommend things that benefit you, your operation. Maybe it benefits the flow of service, but also maybe it benefits the bottom line. Because sometimes servers just want to recommend things because it tastes good. And not that you shouldn't recommend things that taste good, but there has to be some thought and strategy behind why you're recommending things. Maybe your kitchen is really busy and you say, recommend bread for everyone because that buys you time to get the next course out. Another kitchen might say, recommend the steak because that's our big profit margin item. So anyway, use that strategy where you are. Tailor it to your needs and to your restaurant. Think about the lighting in the restaurant. Is it too bright? Is it not bright enough? If you don't have windows, do you need to have lamps on the table? Finding the right setting on the dimmer for the restaurant is crucial. Mark it so it's there every single day, because a different person sets the light every day and it's always just slightly ajar and it's never just perfect. Lighting matters, as do seating arrangements. You want to make sure that your restaurant is comfortable for the type of restaurant that you are. I'll give you this example. In Austin, where I am, I think was one of the first cities to really introduce this communal style dining, and food arrives when it arrives. Like chefs would say, our type of restaurant is the chef likes to course things out and send it as it's ready. That's just their way of saying, yeah, we're just going to put it up as we put it up because we're slammed. And that style of dining was very popular in Austin in a very casual setting. And then you try and introduce that into a different market, and it didn't necessarily work. Because other markets were like, I don't want to sit with strangers. I don't like the communal style seating. I want to sit with my table and I don't want anyone listening. I don't feel like talking to the people next to me. I don't want my food to arrive whenever it arrives. I want it to arrive how I order it and how I want it. So understanding that maybe a communal style seating is not appropriate for all restaurants. Maybe they want privacy. Maybe you're the type of restaurant where people are there for the experience. It's date night. Well, date night doesn't work always at a communal style dining table. But a communal style dining table worked very well for a young social environment type restaurant. So know where you're at. All those things are going to affect it. I know certain restaurants that people enjoy eating there more because the mirror is close to them and they can look at themselves. And people like looking at themselves in the mirror. So a restaurant that I knew would position mirrors so the guests could look at themselves and they enjoyed the meal a lot more. It's interesting how that works. Then you have to think about how color affects the dining room. They say red, which you see in a lot of Chinese restaurants, is an appetite stimulant, and blue is an appetite suppressant. Most people will tell you, don't ever paint your restaurant blue. Unless you're a seafood restaurant, it's usually an appetite suppressant. Hence why there's not a lot of naturally occurring blue foods out there in nature, with the exception of maybe blueberries and blue Gatorade. Wait, blue Gatorade is not naturally occurring. And blue food in general is kind of gross. I don't eat blue. But even the color of the plate has been shown to affect in psychological experiments how salty the food is perceived or how sweet it is. Interesting. There was an experiment where people were given a bottomless bowl of soup, meaning that you could eat as much soup as you want. They put the soup in front of you, and as your soup got lower, they would keep pouring more soup so you could eat all the soup you wanted. And what was interesting about that experiment is people tended to eat 73% more soup. So they ate more soup. But when asked afterwards, those people that had the bottomless bowl of soup or those that had the standard portion of soup, they were both equally satisfied. So more soup didn't necessarily mean more satisfaction. More is not always better. Thomas Keller is very famous for talking about this in his French laundry cookbook, the very first one, about the law of diminishing returns, and how after a certain point, more is not always better. Sometimes you want just enough so you could enjoy it and then move on to the next thing. Bigger portions don't always equal bigger satisfaction. When you're designing a restaurant, make sure you're considering it all: auditory, visual, kinesthetic. What does your restaurant smell like? What does your restaurant sound like? What does your restaurant look like? What does your restaurant feel like? If you could improve 1% of all of those things, you're better than yesterday. Do your own personal audit on your restaurant and see where you could find the improvement. Anyway, if you want to support the show, you know what to do. Leave 5 stars, nothing less than 5 stars. Go to chefspsa.com where you get all the books, all the merch, including this brand new Chef's PSA white hoodie and this Happy Cook hat. Go get the books, Culinary Leadership Fundamentals, Kitchen Art of War, Bad Sue, Good Chef. I'm currently working on the Spanish audiobook version of Culinary Leadership Fundamentals, so that'll be out soon. And I'm writing another book forever, but I'm going to start hustling on it. Anyway, go find me on Substack. The very first Chef's PSA exclusive podcast is going to be on Substack, Leadership Secrets. You don't want to miss it. See you next week. Hit the porno music.
Yo, it's André in the kitchen, mixing, dropping chef knowledge, no fiction, stirring up the beats, heating up the session. Listen close, class is in session.